Hi, I'm Cavan Arrowsmith from Turnkey Consulting, and I'm joined by Chris Boyle, our Practice Director of Identity and Access Management and Privileged Access Management, and Andrew Morris, our Cybersecurity Expert, who helps many of our customers with the cybersecurity strategies and implementations. And we're talking today about Privileged Access Management for the wider estate. So we've got a few questions and answers. So hopefully, Chris, Andrew, you're ready to help answer and provide some of the information, and also just make it quite informative about what some of the other customers are doing around privileged access management. So one of the first questions that I've got, so if our infrastructure consists of many different operating systems and application types, do we have to use more than one solution?
So the answer to that is no, not typically. Most of the vendors that are in the privileged access management market, they support all of the different platforms that we see that our customers have. So that would be cloud platforms, on-premise platforms, databases, Windows, Linux. Typically, they would support in some manner the entire estate. We do find that there are some legacy applications that may not be supported out of the box, but most of the vendors do provide customization ability so that they can then onboard those legacy applications should they want to. The alternative to that obviously is looking at the end of life of those applications and looking at when they're likely to be onboarding, and also the risk that those applications pose versus the effort it would take to actually customize the PAM solution to be able to provide that functionality.
So one of the other questions that we've been asked in the past is, how do we overcome some of the user reluctance, bit of the obstacles to actually using these PAM solutions for applications and systems?
Cool. So some of the challenges that we do face essentially is that I guess just for everyone's benefit, when the way that PAM works is it will provide a user the session that they require to be able to manage privileged systems. So, for example, if you're wanting to manage a Windows system, you may use RDP to be able to RDP onto a server. If you're using Linux, it would then open you an SSH session where people sometimes use PuTTY or many other tools. Now, where we see challenges around this is that the administrators of Linux systems in particular all have different flavors of the tools that they use to administer the systems. So many of the vendors now have provided a way in which that you don't have to use the vendor out of the box solution or PuTTY or anything like that. What you can actually do is you can use your administration tool of choice. And then PAM will sit between the administration tool and the infrastructure that you're trying to manage. So you get all the benefits of PAM, while from a user perspective, they don't have they don't have to change the administration tools that they're familiar with. But what it does give is it gives the added benefit of providing a single sign-on type experience, so that when they're trying to log into a system to manage it, the PAM system itself will elevate them to the required privileges that they need without having to show them the password or them having to maintain a password set themselves. Once they've logged on to the PAM system will then provide them the credentials and provide them the sessions that they need. So that helps to overcome some of the reluctance and uptake that we see across an organization.
Absolutely, and that can also be supported by training and education of the end users of the PAM tool. A lot of them will see it as just throwing obstacles in their way, making their job more complicated. But by explaining why we're doing this, the importance of it, and the importance of their role, you can often overcome that reluctance by helping them understand that, as well as making it easier for them with single sign-on, as Chris pointing out that there won't be as many targets as they won't be a target for things like phishing as much, because they physically won't know the passwords anymore. So their ability to lose it, or the risk of sharing or doing the wrong thing or accidentally misusing or abusing the systems drastically goes down. So informing them early on, having that conversation with you and bringing them along on the journey really helps.
And I think Andrew makes a really good point there, because obviously the risks that a PAM product will mitigate against, we're not having to share those user credentials and have them potentially stored somewhere, and also the risk of phishing attacks. It has to be weighed up against the user experience. So what we actually find is that when we perform that training that Andrew was just talking about there, and we demonstrate this to users, actually the user experience improves alongside the security, whilst reducing the risk to the organisation as well. So when the PAM products kind of first started out, the uptake wasn't as good as it is now, simply because the user experience wasn't provided. It was all about increasing security and reducing risk. Whereas once you bring the user experience into the fold, then it's easily adopted by users.
So I think you've probably actually, both of you have touched upon actually some of the challenges, some of the common challenges actually for people using PAM. But Andrew, specifically to you, what are the common challenges when introducing PAM, if you haven't already described some of those?
Some of the biggest challenges companies face is identifying the scope of which servers, systems, databases and applications they want to bring into the scope of PAM, and then identifying those users. Typically, a lot of servers and operating systems and databases won't have been under much form of formal governance and process. They'll have lots of accounts that have never been used or been lying there dormant. They'll be using a different naming convention than the rest of the organization. So trying to track down who has access, what access they have, do they need it, will be some of the main challenges organizations face, certainly in the early stages. It's driving that scope and making sure that everything is appropriately captured in terms of who is accessing what systems. That can be harder than most organizations realize, especially if they don't necessarily have the skills in their internal teams to look at different versions of operating systems or different applications they don't normally touch.
I think just kind of going on from that, Andrew, I think we tend to find that there's almost two types of client. And that there's clients that have experienced the pain of doing some of the challenges that PAM systems would overcome, and they've actually been involved in something like a data breach, and they've had to do, for example, maybe rotate all of their, change all of their admin passwords, across their entire estate, which is then, they're actively looking for a PAM solution. Whereas the second type of client have been fortunate to potentially not have, a major breach, and then trying to understand, how long a project and an implementation cycle might take, and helping them prioritize some of the challenges that they might want to overcome. And I can give you an example of the first one. So we had a client that had a data breach, and essentially what had happened is one of their administrator accounts passwords had been compromised, and then data had been stolen from that organization. And so what they had to do, this was a global organization, tens of thousands of users, and also thousands of admins. They also had third-party administrators as well from managed service providers. And what they actually did is they had to change all of their passwords for their administration accounts once. And they did this manually, and it took them tens of thousands of man hours to be able to perform this, because first of all, you have to identify which are the administrator accounts in the organization. You have to not only understand who's using them from a user perspective, but also understand what services are running as those administrators or those service accounts. So you have to then visit the entire estate manually, or using some form of automated tool to be able to do that. And again, a global organization, different territories, different sets of administrators and third parties as well, that can be a huge challenge. So when you introduce something like a PAM tool, then what that would actually give you is the ability to go off as part of an initial phase, would be to discover all of the application estates. So that's discover all of your assets, your Windows servers, your Linux servers, your cloud platforms, etc. Look inside those platforms to which services are running as these administrative users, and then capture all of that information, and then you can use a data-driven methodology to be able to look at where your priorities are. So if you've encountered a data breach, then you would automatically have some priorities. But from a just going back to what Andrew was saying earlier, for some of the customers who potentially don't have those priorities listed, it would be looking at what are the high-risk systems. So what are the crown jewels? What are the financial systems? Which are the biggest impacts if there's a service outage? So there's all of these types of decisions that need to be made, which will then feed into the priorities that you will, which is where that you will deploy PAM. Because ultimately, the people with privileged access are the people with the keys to the kingdom. So working out, the strategy around which systems, which applications would benefit from a PAM product and reduce some of the overhead and administration pain from an organisation. It's one of the challenges, but it's something that you can apply, as I say, a data-driven methodology to be able to overcome that in a structured and organised way.
You talked about the data-driven methodology there. Is that how you would try and then use that to validate what users should have access to on the servers?
So the data-driven methodology allows you to identify all of the accounts that are what we term privileged. So it gives you a list almost of all of the accounts that have got privileged access. So for example, in Active Directory, you might have domain admins. On all of the individual servers in the state, some organizations have thousands of servers. So on each of those servers, there is an administration group. So it's the users that have those groups, and those groups might have groups. So there's a huge list of people that might have access to those servers. So using a discovery tool that most PAM providers include as part of their offering. For Windows servers, you can go around the estate and it can scan all of these and identify all of these different types of users. To a certain extent with Unix as well, that ability is there, but a lot of the Unix system is about identifying who's got access to be able to elevate themselves to the root account. Once you've done that, then you can start to look at which of your people, so rather than users, which of the people have got access to use the accounts that have got privileged access. And then what you might find is that some of the people within your organization have actually far too much access to servers that they need, and they then become the high risk people within the organization. So that might drive, rather than looking at it on a per service basis, you might say, well, actually, we've identified 50 people in the organization who've got, basically access across the entire estate, and the priority might be to reduce that as one of the goals. So there's lots of different angles you can approach this from, and it's having that data to back up the strategy that you put in place.
So thinking about the skill sets that are going to be required here, Andrew, what did you think regarding that?
Fundamentally, you need someone to be able to take a look at the access they have and understand if there is any risks there. What is privileged, what isn't, are all privileges considered equal? Some of the tools will help you analyze that and understand, access to root and other common vulnerabilities. But if you have certain more uncommon pieces of software or some things like SAP HANA in place where tools might not be able to comprehensively scan it, you will need some level of expertise in understanding the tool or the implications of an individual having access to that functionality. So you can often require a wide-ranging skill set just to understand the different pieces and how they work together.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think Andrew's quite correct there in that there is when you think about Windows admins, you think about Linux admins, but then you have the application admins as well. You have excuse me, you have also a lot of cloud infrastructure now. So there's you might need administrators of AWS, of Office 365, Salesforce, and all these kind of cloud-based applications that are now part and parcel of the crown jewels again of the organization. So typically the skill sets you would need from a a services partner would typically cover a wide range of those, but actually engaging with the stakeholders within the business and the application owners is absolutely key. One of the other challenges, just going back to a previous question, around, and also it's working with those system owners where they understand how they have, Andrew says, configured the word privilege means, because it might not just be the standard accounts that are in use. So what you actually need is you have the data that you would be able to retrieve from the discovery tool, but also you need that inside knowledge from the application owners themselves. So you can't see the discovery tool as a one thing fits all, one size fits all type of solution. There will have to be input from those application owners. So sometimes on a PAM project, one of the hardest challenges is actually scheduling the time of those very busy people to be able to help you discover those what those privileged accounts are.
Yeah.
And one of the other things as well is where the application owners are critical is to make sure you've covered all of the assets as well. The amount of times we've scanned servers or systems and then it turns out we've missed one or two because it wasn't on our list we were provided, or we were given a different IP address or something else. It's just making sure that here is your estate for this application, here is all the users, here's all the servers. Is that information correct? Is there anything else we need to validate?
Yep. That's a very good point. Now, who should end up reviewing all of the logs that the PAM solutions create?
Well, there is a lot of logging that goes on, as you can expect, especially in large organizations with thousands of administrators, and all of the PAM providers. They capture the logs. And they have a forwarding ability, so they'll forward them to the SOC using for a SIEM tool. There, that might be Logarithm, it might be Splunk or ArcSight, for example. And then what you can do is you can integrate that into your SOC strategy. So there's almost two types of there's logging and there's also reporting as well. So the one thing that the PAM system will do is it will be able to determine who is using a service account or a generic account or an administrative account at any particular time. So being able to ascertain who has been using that account is absolutely fundamental to a PAM solution. So it's not only about, from a security perspective, being able to diagnose who has done what and when. It's being able to actually prove to auditors, who has got access to what system through the audit reporting that is typically found within each of the different vendors. Now, different vendors provide different amounts of reports out of the box, and as such, that's one of the things that you should probably look at when assessing which of the PAM providers to go with, because ultimately besides providing your organisation with a service, you would then also have to satisfy the audit requirements that the auditors would have.
If you thought about the entire estate for a second, with all the different applications that you've got, which systems should be in scope and how do you prioritize that?
So that's a good question. Again, I think coming back to some of the things that we've mentioned previously about the data-driven methodology and the prioritization, that's great from an administrative perspective, but also there'll be the business risk that we're trying to mitigate against. Typically, organizations have a set of systems that they are critical to the business, and there's also a number of systems that are the financial systems, which are subject to much more stringent audit, and then there's also critical systems that might be consumer facing devices. So for example, for online
high risk, really.
Sorry?
High risk systems, really.
High risk systems, yeah. So they would always typically be prioritized. But again, if there are a number of those systems that you would want to prioritize, again, it's looking at which ones you would onboard into the system first. So what's causing you the most trouble? Again, there's also systems where they might be looked after by a third party. And if those third parties are potentially causing outages through making changes on an evening and things like that, we have clients that have experienced those types of difficulties. Then they might want to look at putting some of those systems in the control of PAM so that they can use some of the functionality within PAM, such as session recording, from both a video perspective and also recording the keystrokes and things like that, so they can if an outage does happen, and they can really quickly diagnose what changes have been made to a system by playing back the sessions as well.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. You absolutely have to take some form of risk-based approach on this. If the company's performing business impact assessments on their applications, then you can use that as a guide to identify their critical systems or crown jewels. Other applications you need to consider as well is where there's data that needs to be protected by regulation or legislation, such as GDPR or PCI for payment cards. All those systems have to be covered and protected sufficiently if that data is being accessed, manipulated. That does include non-production systems as well. Many companies will only consider production, but you need to consider access across the entire estate and the impact it can have. If somebody could cause an impact on your production systems, so it cause a disruption to your business or data integrity or confidentiality breach, then you need to protect that data at source, and that could be the development of applications in development or locking down specific access in tests to ensure data integrity, so your business data testing is accurate. So it can actually end up being anywhere in your landscape, but you need to make a risk-based assessment of that.
Yeah. Okay. No, that absolutely makes sense. So we're probably coming towards the end of time for this session. So I just wanted to get actually your two's thoughts here about if there were three things that an organisation just about start embarking on their PAM strategy, maybe starting to look at potential vendors and actually how that's going to work for the organisation. So Chris, if I can ask you first, what are the three things that you would recommend an organisation do first?
Okay, so I guess the first thing would be to set up the proper governance structures and stakeholder management, because ultimately every project relies on this. And what people sometimes do is they see PAM as an IT tool, but actually it does affect the IT administrators the most, but ultimately it will affect business users as well, because there's people out there in the business that will manage systems and things like that. So. And additional to that, there is some key decisions that will need to be made during the project. So having the right level of governance over that would be absolutely essential, as it is to any project.
So I would agree with governance. That would be my first, and I would also make sure that governance includes the review of logs, making sure that entire process of validation and checking is agreed and in place, whether it's manual or via a SIEM tool or some other form of reporting. Because otherwise, if you don't have any evidence and you can't report on it and you can't prove it, none of these controls exist or are worth anything. The main item for me to consider is also going to be scope. Make sure you know what you're going to be implementing. Have a phased approach, risk-based, as we've already covered, but do it in stages, system by system, rather than trying to boil the ocean all in one go. Otherwise, you'll start a project which will never be completed.
So we have to remember that the number of PAM capabilities is growing all of the time. There is a number of capabilities that you can deliver within that organization. And again, just going back to the comment that Andrew made about not trying to boil the ocean with regards to the scope of the estate and what you're trying to onboard, as well. Look at the number of capabilities that can be delivered. You don't have to deliver all of those capabilities right from the outset. So if you take a staged approach, not only to onboarding the number of applications, but onboarding the number of capabilities, you do that in line with your risk-based approach and also the priorities of the business. Because as we always recommend a phased approach. I think Big Bang is definitely a thing of the past. and being able to demonstrate value to a business quite quickly would allow, and communicate that with the business as well, so they can see the benefits that it's bringing them. Again, through user experience, through improved security. But we find that if you give people, an easier method to carry out their day-to-day job, they will adopt it quite quickly. So make it very, very simple for users to use, to understand, and to be able to, onboard new systems and technologies.
I guess one final point from me is just to make sure you remember the scope of what you're trying to achieve in your mind at all times. Whether you're doing this because of an audit finding, you've suffered a breach, you're trying to improve your overall security maturity, or for another reason. Just remember what you're trying to achieve, what information and evidence you need to achieve that, and make sure you have the governance in place to support it. Otherwise, your aims won't be realised if you can't prove any of it.
So I think that pretty much completes the three takeaways that you guys are providing. I think that really good advice around those last three. But I'd like to thank both of you for your time. So Chris Boyle, Andrew Morris, thank you very much. I've been Cavan Arrowsmith, the host. If you'd like to get in touch, I'll leave my contact details later in the show. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.